Hello, my name is Mara and welcome to Books Like Whoa. We are rapidly approaching the end of the year, and so it is time for me to do my year-end wrap-up where I'm going to talk about my biggest hits, my biggest disappointments, and my biggest surprise. Now, I thought about also including a bunch of stat wrap-up type things, and I may still do that. I'm not sure. I'm not totally decided. I'm not going to film anything with it, but future editing me, if you would like to include some stats, here is your window. Do it now. And I should also just mention that I am filming this on the 15th of December, which is for me going to be the end of the year. Anything else that I read in terms of hits, misses, etc., if I would want to include it on a year-end list, would count towards next year's list in 2018. So anyway, let's get to getting. We're going to start with the biggest hits because that's fun. Hit number 1, or really this would be number 10 because I'm starting at 10 and working my way down to my favorite books. So number 10 is Chimamanda Ngozie Aditchie's Dear Ijewele, and this is not that original of a book. It's not that groundbreaking in terms of the ideas it's talking about. What I really love about this book is that it's in content very similar to Dorothy Sayers' Are Women Human, which is one of my very favorite books, but I find that it's a more approachable text because it is written in letter form. And I also love that the lens of it is Chimamanda's writing to her friend Ijewele and kind of saying, hey, here's how I would try to raise a feminist child. So I think that that's an approachable sort of way into the topic of feminism, and I think the format makes it very kind of easy to get through, relatable, and then finally it's just good. There's just a lot of good pearls of wisdom in here, and really well written. It's intersectional because it's being written by an African woman. So anyway, this is number 10 for me. I think this is a very giftable book, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Number 9, and I'm just realizing that there is a theme to a lot of my favorites this year. After the election last year, I think I just needed in my soul reassurance that misogyny is not going to prevail. So I think I was reading a lot of sort of woman-focused books this year, and I happened to read a lot of really good ones. So anyway, number 9 is Rebecca Traister's All the Single Ladies. This came out, I believe, in 2016, but essentially it's a history book. This is a history charting sort of how women have, single women, unmarried women, have been kind of incorporated into society, at least into American society since its inception. And the subtitle is Unmarried Women in the Rise of an Independent Nation. So it's kind of also tracing these ideas of independence in American history alongside these women who are now independent. So anyway, I found it a really fascinating read. I think if you are a single woman, I am, all the single ladies out there, it's particularly relevant, but in general, I just think it's really well written, very interesting, and if you are interested in women's studies and or history, definitely recommend this one. Also, it works really well as audio. Number 8, the other kind of big theme since last year's election, and I guess I'm just showing all my cards now, that I've been reading about is sort of totalitarianism, fascism, how extreme nationalism is able to take root in societies and in cultures, and one of the books that I read kind of along that theme from one of the philosophers who's done the most work on totalitarianism is from Hannah Arendt. It is Eichmann in Jerusalem. Now, this is somewhat of a controversial book. It's an account of one of the main perpetrators of the Holocaust, though there's sort of a question mark besides that, his capture and subsequent trial in the 1960s in Israel. And Hannah Arendt is writing as a non-religious Jew. She actually had to flee Europe in the wake of the rise of Hitler. And it is a very controversial book because there's not enough time for me to get into that. Let's just say that I had preconceptions coming into this in terms of what her biases were going to be and maybe some of the problems or flaws in her account. And I have to say, I was very surprised at how skillfully the narrative of this came together, how she uses an extreme amount of detail to immerse the reader into the mindset of Eichmann, and then kind of uses that to sort of twist your perception of things. And it was not nearly as pro-Eichmann as I had been led to believe it was. So anyway, regardless of what you think about this book, I thought it was very well written, very thought-provoking, and it led to a lot of reflection and sort of mulling on my part in terms of like, what does it mean to be complicit? And also because essentially this is the project manager of the Holocaust, and I am a project manager, business analyst person. I think it also just made me kind of reflect on my own profession a little bit in terms of the ends of what you were trying to manage matter as much as the management itself, basically. So anyway, I really enjoyed this, and it surprised me. I wasn't sure. I thought that I wasn't going to like it, and I ended up really, really liking it, and it definitely enriched my understanding of this period of history and of kind of her philosophical work. Number 7, we have there's a lot of nonfiction, especially up here at the top of, the higher up in the countdown. So number 7, Trainwreck by Sady Doyle. This book I liked even better than all the single ladies. I read them around the same time. I also think this works well as audio, by the way. This is essentially like more of a pop culture / history analysis of why women like publicly shame themselves and how we perceive them. It says the women we love to hate, mock, fear, and why. Just really interesting. If you are interested in pop culture and kind of like a more intellectual take on pop culture, I would definitely recommend this. Okay, number 6. And now I will tell you that this series was neck and neck with a different book and a different series in terms of what was what was my biggest surprise of the year. So keep that in mind that I found this very surprising. But you guys have heard me raving about the Natural series. This is a YA Criminal Minds quartet of books, and there's also a novella. I hope that means they're going to write more of them because I really, really enjoy this series. This was my favorite of those 4. It's the second book called Killer Instinct. I was very surprised by this because when I heard that sort of description, I thought, oh, that sounds amazing, but like, can it possibly live up to that? Yeah, I think it really does. I think the writing is solid. This is far and away the best YA that I read this year, and something that I would really heartily recommend to anybody who's interested in YA or mystery or not quite supernatural, but like unusual, like extraordinary abilities, let's say. I found this to be a real surprise in a positive way. I gobbled these up, and I want more. I want more. So if you know of books that are like this, if you've read this series and you found books that you think are comparable, let me know, because I'm so sad this is over, and I would love to read more books like this. Number 5, White Trash. That's me. Kind of, yeah, but no. The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America by Nancy Isenberg. Again, this is sort of along the lines of things that I've been thinking about this year post D-Day. I don't really know what to say about this aside from what I've already said, which is I think this is very well done history. I think it's very nicely written history, and I think that it is a vital part of discourse in American life. I don't think that you can really understand a lot of the political discourse in the US if you don't understand 2 things. One is race, the other is class, and really the third, which is how those 2 are so intertwined. It's very hard for us to have good conversations in this country, I think in large part because we have made class sort of a taboo topic. So I really appreciate that this was a very respectful, very thoughtful, and I think really great starting place for talking honestly about the underclass of white Americans that have always been, like literally since the first boat, have been a part of this country. And I think until we really have honest discussions about that, it's hard to make a lot of progress on other things. So this was a great book, really recommend. Again, another one that I would tell you works very well on audio. Number 4 is a book I have in e-form, so there you go, is Wait For It by Mariana Zapata. Now, Mariana Zapata is like crack to me. She writes contemporary romances of a very particular ilk. I think I'm at some point going to do a little mini video on her, just like where to start and my thoughts, because I really enjoy her books, and like I said, they're just like scrummy brain candy for me. She reminds me, and I'm going to be careful because we're going to talk more about this person later. She reminds me in some ways of Kristen Ashley, who is another writer, like a self-published writer of contemporary romance, whose books are just like addictive. Once you start reading them, it's very hard to stop. Loyal fan base, etc. What sets Mariana Zapata very much apart from Kristen Ashley is that her books are all what are called slow burns. So the main couples in these stories do not get together until usually the last like quarter to 10%. It's a very big buildup, and all of her books have a lot of family dynamics. They have a lot of other things just besides the romance happening in them. And the heroes are always very, for the most part, are very like broody, lovable. Very few of them are like over the top assholes, which is something that happens a lot in contemporary romance. And the reason I picked this one, this is like one of, maybe the first book I read this year, actually. Yeah, I think it was. The reason I picked it was because I see this as a major improvement in her writing and in her editing, neither of which are perfect yet, because again, she is self-published, and so she's doing it on her own. But it was a major step forward, in my opinion, in both those areas. It was taking a peripheral character from another book, really giving them an interesting backstory, and I think using children and tragedy, which can go very awry in contemporary romance, in a very effective way that I didn't feel like was cheap or like melodramatic or maudlin for the most part. I felt like she did a good job of making it seem very like lived in. So I was excited to see an author that I enjoy so much do what I felt like was a major step forward in their career, in my humble opinion. So that's why I wanted to put this higher up on the list of something that I really just enjoyed and see as hopeful for future books. Number 3. Another book, all of the remaining books you've heard a lot about. Number 3 is Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. I had to put this really high up on the list because this book literally has changed like how I'm living my life. So, you know, that's pretty significant. This is essentially a history of theories about how nutrition works and how weight gain and loss works. And what Gary Taubes, I think, makes a very effective argument for is that the reason we think what we think about how fat loss and fat gain works, namely calories in, calories out, has a very specific ideological root that is not including previous research done by the best doctors in the world who happened to be living in Austria and Germany at the time of World War II, and therefore whose research was essentially kind of like thrown out. And I think he does a really nice job of sort of like making a very persuasive case as to why the obesity rise that we've seen in the West has happened, that we've had a certain theory of the case, and when that theory of the case was made official in the 80s, we see an immediate increase in the amount of obesity that we had, at least in America and as well as in other countries. And essentially saying like, hey, we can't, what you can tell he's very passionate about when you see interviews and stuff with him is bad science. And what he's essentially saying is nutrition is riddled with bad science, and he has like zero patience for that. And he essentially is saying it's unacceptable for us to pick a hypothesis that has again and again been proved to be false just because that has been the dogma of the last 50 years. Like we can't do that. So anyway, I found this to be a fascinating book. Like I said, this book has literally changed my life, improved my health, improved my happiness and sanity. So I'm very thankful to it. And it has like sent me on a whole, as I've called it, my tinfoil conspiracy hat wearing thing of eliminating sugar from my diet and loving it. Number 2 is 4 books because I just didn't feel like it was fair. Like when I was going through my ratings, I was like, okay, well, almost half of my list would be taken up with Ilona Andrews, and that just feels excessive even for me. So number 2 is just going to be all the Ilona Andrews books that I read this year. One of which is One Fell Sweep, which was the final book in the initial Innkeeper Chronicles that they were doing. So that book is part of this, but really what I want to say was my second favorite book experience of the year was the binge read of the Hidden Legacy series that I did over Thanksgiving. All 3 of those books are fantastic. They are what I would probably describe as urban fantasy romance. Please pardon these covers, they are terrible, and if you do not like reading romance, you will never pick these up because you think that looks awful. They are not awful, they are awesome. If you like urban fantasy, if you like, you know, magic-y kind of stuff, it is just so, it's very funny. It's the kind of writing I love, which is very quick. Like, it moves very nicely. The action scenes are written very well. The plotting is great. The characters are interesting. The world building's great. It's just Ilona Andrews, for me, writes the perfect kind of books that I like to read. And I would definitely recommend, if you have any interest in her, definitely give that team that's a husband and wife who write together, give them a try because those books are fantastic. If I had to tell you where to start, I think if you've never read romance, you're not that into romance at all, I probably would actually recommend the Innkeeper Chronicles because that is much more of kind of a traditional fantasy type series. If you're more open to romance, I'd say this is a great place to start. But anyway, overall, I I love those books. They're so good. And finally, drumroll for my biggest hit of the year, probably not a surprise, Hunger by Roxane Gay. This book, if I could give, I think I said this in my Christmas tag video, if I could make everybody read this, I would. I just think that this is such a wonderful statement about what it means to be fat, what it means to be a fat woman, what it means to be a fat black woman. And I'm not a fat black woman, but I am a fat woman, and I can just tell you that this book is just so good and is so... I think it challenges a lot of the perceptions people have about why people are heavy, how that impacts your psyche, and how the things that have led you to become heavy. That, like, it's complicated, it's not that simple, and leaving mean comments on people's Instagram is very easy to do without having to actually, like, express and engage in empathy with somebody else. So anyway, this is my favorite book of the year. If I could make everyone read this, I would. Love it. So those were my hits. Now on to the biggest surprise of the year, and this is in e-form, so I can't show it to you, but I was between choosing this and the Natural series, and I ultimately ended up going with the In Death series by J.D. Robb as my biggest surprise of the year, just because I had read some Nora Roberts at the beginning of this year, but not a lot. And I think just realizing how much I just love the way she does mysteries and thrillers, especially like with the romance thrown into it, was a real surprise to me. And I don't usually love, I mean, I did a Know Your Tropes mystery edition, and I talked about the fact that I don't usually really love kind of like city cop based mysteries. Those aren't usually really my thing or like my preferred flavor of mystery, but these just really work for me. The other thing that surprises me is that, like, everybody talks about how much they love Eve and Rourke, and I get it, like, especially as I went on in the series, and my favorite book to date is Witness and Death. Particularly in that book, I was like, oh, the banter, it's so cute. I totally get why people love these. The other thing that surprised me about why I like these books, though, is that Rourke can be a real asshole, and it doesn't seem that the author, like, the authorial attitude towards him is that he's being an asshole. It's more like, he just put Eve in her place, and I'm like, no, like, that was not okay. Like, that was not okay. So I think the fact that that happens, not all the time, but I would say once every 2 or 3 books, and I still am reading and still am enjoying those books, is also surprising to me. So I'm gonna say that that was my biggest surprise of the year, is how much I've fallen in love with that series. And I've gotten through, I think, about 15 of them so far, and there's like another 30 to go. So it will be a while before I'm done, but I'm enjoying those. And then let's end on the juicy stuff. That is the biggest disappointments of the year. And I only picked 3 of these because I had a lot of low-rated things, but most of them I just didn't feel strongly enough about or disappointed enough in to consider being worth talking about. But I did have 3 that I thought were worth bringing up for discussion. So number 3 is When Dimple Met Rishi. I don't have much to say about this other than the fact that I DNF'd this book really disappointed me. I was really hoping I'd found a YA contemporary romance that I was going to enjoy, and that was not the case. I know a lot of people really did like this book, and I think that that's great. It just didn't, I think the writing in particular, the style of it just didn't quite work for me, and YA romance in general is a little bit of a hard sell for me. So I think with those things combined, I was genuinely just like disappointed that I did not like this book. Number 2 in my biggest disappointments was a disappointment, let me tell you. So at some point I hope I'm gonna do a WTF review, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Someday. This book made me so angry. Backstory time. So I mentioned Kristen Ashley earlier when I was talking about Mariana Zapata. Kristen Ashley is a somewhat infamous, if you're not familiar with like the romance genre, is a somewhat infamous author because she is self-published and rose to incredible success doing self-publishing. And the way she did that was through a very idiosyncratic writing style. A writing style that I can tell you on, like, in terms of just if you look at the words on the pages, it is bad. Like, it's badly written. The rambling, the like way too long books, I'm talking like 600-page books that should easily be 250 pages, the constant use of like little terms of endearments, etc. Like, it is bad writing, but there's something about it that I'm telling you, if you can connect with it, it sucks you in and you emerge from the vortex like 6 hours later being like, what happened? Where did the time, I don't know what happened. And this is what happened to me. I could have put this in my biggest surprises because I'd heard about her and I was like, the other thing you should know about her is that she is famous for having like super over the top alpha heroes who are just like, honestly, probably should just be called jerks. They're assholes. They're not nice people. Some of them are like pimps. Some of them are like borderline rapists. Like, they're not nice, and somehow they're the heroes of these stories. I don't know. It's really disappointing in some ways when I take a step back. But anyway, so I could have put this in as a surprise, one of her books in a surprise category, because I got a book called The Gamble, I think for free or for like $1. And it's the beginning of a series called The Colorado Mountain Men. And they're very crackalicious, and I was reading it and I was like, oh, okay, this guy's definitely an alpha, but he's what I would call a caretaker alpha, which is like, he can be very bossy and over the top, but it's all in service of the fact that he is like, I will protect you, and like, he takes that very seriously. So I can like deal with that in the context of alpha-ness. And the way she was writing those books, I was like, yeah, I really like this. I've read, I think, all of them but one at this point. Like, for the most part, I really like those books. They're fun, just like light, crackalicious reading. So I got another of her books on sale. That book was called Raid. And it was not crackalicious. It was infuriating. It was infuriating because essentially what it was glorifying an abusive relationship, and I spent the whole time just like with my jaw open being horrified. I can't even, this is why I need to do a WTF review of this, because like the things I need to say about this book are too many to put into this video. But suffice it to say that there is like basically at a minimum emotional abuse happening in this relationship of like 2 days, and everybody's acting like it's perfectly normal and that the heroine is just overreacting or should just like, if he just needs the love of a good woman. No, he doesn't need the love of a good woman. He needs to be arrested or taken away because like he is clearly not able to deal with like adult feelings in an appropriate way. Like, here are the types of scenes that would happen in this book. Yeah, you know, I mean, he came home early and I'd been cleaning out his house for him. He really wanted to have like a good home and just like something to come home to. So I thought I would, you know, kind of like decorate and clean up for him. And I thought he would really like it. But, you know, instead he kind of like cornered me into a wall and started yelling at me and like maybe like punched something near me. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. What do you think I should do, best friend? Do you think that this is the part where the best friend tells her to leave? No, here's what the best friend says. Well, he's he's a fine specimen of a man. He's just so macho and has so many feelings, but he doesn't know how to handle them because he has a Y chromosome, and that keeps him from being fully emotionally available or competent. You know, sometimes that just means he needs to hit things, and I think you're being really unreasonable in your expectations of what he should be doing and how he should be reacting to you. So maybe go home and give him a blowjob and see if he'll forgive you for your lack of understanding. Ah! This book was maddening! So yeah, that was my second most disappointing book of the year. Fuck you, Raid. And the most disappointing book of the year, yeah. There's not much to say. I've become more disappointed the more I've thought about this. And I love you so much, J.K. Rowling, that I think I'm just gonna leave it at that, or else I may cry or yell again. And I don't think we want either of those things to happen. So, those were my biggest hits, my biggest surprise, and my biggest disappointments of the year 2017. It's been a very good reading year. I was looking through my ratings, and I didn't have as many highs as I thought I did in terms of like real, like true favorites. But I had like a ton of books in the 5 out of 7 scale for me, which would be a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. So I had a lot of those that were better than average books, and that really drove up kind of my average rating, and I think drove up my overall perception that this was a really good year of reading. But I've been yammering on enough, so I would love to hear from you guys. What were some of your biggest hits of the year, some of your biggest disappointments, etc.? Definitely let me know that in the comments. Let me know if you really agree with me on any of these picks, if you really disagree with me on any of these picks. Debate is always welcome, as long as it's civil. Like, I would love to hear from you guys. So let me know your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. All of that information is listed in the description box below. And I will see you guys on Saturday for a little Poirot check-in / goodbye, Happy New Year's type thing. So I will just see you guys then. Bye!